A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Turning our attention today to country churches. There's a perception in some country churches that city pastors are coming. But our special guest today says, stop waiting for the city to send leaders. They're not coming. He says country pastors need to raise up leaders and pastors from the country. He's working with country pastors nationwide and is launching the Regional Leadership Academy, an online coaching community focused on leadership development. And it'll be about helping regional churches raise even better leaders and lots more of them. Darren Bonnel has launched the Multi-Site X, part of the Jethro project. He's the church planting director for Australian Christian churches in New South Wales. And he's the senior pastor of the Chapel Collective, a regional multi-site church in 8 locations with a base in Tamworth in New South Wales. Darren's joining us. Darren, great to talk to you. Welcome along.
Hi, Neil. Thanks for having me. It's really great to be with you and be with your listeners.
Hey, Darren, let's start with your church. It's pretty different to what a lot of people think about what church and how it works. Can you describe it for us?
Yeah, so we as you described, we lead a multi-site regional church in New South Wales, and so our attitude would be singular in purpose. We're all about the mission of Jesus, the gospel, and building his church. But we would say unique in style, because one of the things about country is, and maybe everywhere, but certainly regionally and rural, you have to contextualise where the church is so it can be, sustainable, healthy, and really, right for its community. And maybe the simplest example I can give you of that, Neil, is the founding church we led for a long time in Tamworth and still oversee. It's a large, thriving regional church. I remember the second church we did was in a tiny community called Gyra, of about 2,000 people. And so, I was young and turned up with my plan, and halfway through the service, I literally heard a rooster crow. And I thought that it must have been next door or something. And I thought, okay, I'm in a different place now. I need to think, how does that work? God, help us to work out how this works here. How does your church work here? So, yeah, it's a broad church, and we're in little chapels, big auditoriums, cafe church, more traditional styles of contemporary church, all of it.
Now, you're overseeing the church still in Tamworth. Let me just go through. You can correct me if I'm wrong on the list here. Tamworth, Gunnedah, Armidale, Gyra, Uralla, Barrabar, Manila and Walker. Is that all of the centres?
No, that's a close list. The list is, your information until now has been incredible if you're good at what you do. Tamworth, Gunnedah, Narrabri, Bendemeer, Armidale, Gyra, Port Macquarie and Wallsend. And so they're our current locations.
All right, okay. And I know that Vision is on air in a lot of those towns, and there might be listeners who are listening in those towns, and you might even have your own special insights to offer, because shortly we want to open our talkback line and just get a bit of feedback from country communities about what churches are doing and what church is like and how hard it is to retain a pastor. We'll get on to some of those sorts of things, but is it true, Darren, you've trained over 100 church planters? Is that the case?
Yeah. The number would be actually way higher than that, Neil.
Okay.
But yeah,
those are old figures.
And I'm not trying to talk it up. I'm just saying, we get to work with church planters in New South Wales and all over Australia these days. And so, yes, it's a great privilege, actually. Sometimes you get shocked what God allows you to do.
And, not hiding anything here either, because I would see as something of a motivation to talk about country churches today with someone like you, Darren. The runs are on the board, and I think there'll be people who are living in country towns who recognise some of the challenges that country churches have and to link in with some of the good things you're doing, I'd be hopeful that there'll be lots of people who'll connect with you even before the end of our conversation, but certainly beyond our conversation today, to help just facilitate extra opportunity for raising up leaders in country churches. Let me ask you about the challenges here, because leaders in country churches, sometimes they're few and far between, and even just getting the right training, the right oversight, those sorts of things. How challenging is that?
It is challenging, especially in the communities where you don't have a university, because, a lot of people, as you know, relocate and to other places. And that's important. It's important that we're training people up into every sphere of life so that, we're impacting people in every corner of society. But in terms of raising them up to be pastors regionally, definitely takes a different mindset. And I loved what you said at the start. If you're waiting for the city churches to do this, it's just not on their radar. And so therefore, we have to really do it regionally ourselves. And so we work with pastors and leaders and churches, all across regional Australia to deliver leadership pipelines and pastoral pipelines that you can do online and put all the tools in the hands of the next generation of leaders and existing leaders to develop them from within. There's no need to be isolated anymore. We can bring best practice, training, development, etc., through online platforms and coaching communities with peers and all of those things we have in place that serve local churches.
We'll talk about some more of those online platforms because in some sense, the city's not far away from the country because of an immediate connection online. But stay with this thought for a few moments. The perception in some country towns, and this might be the experience of listeners in country towns where really there is no in-town pastor face-to-face, and their denominations. Sometimes churches, people from different denominations, just because there is a pastor coming to town, you drop all those barriers and you go and be a part of what's happening for Christians in the community. You're in the ACC movement, Australian Christian Churches, but you work across denominations too, Darren.
Yeah, I absolutely do. And it's one of the joys of what I get to do, Neil, because, at the end of the day, we are all brothers and sisters in Christ, as all your listeners know. And we're all respectful of the distinctions of one another. And, it really is a good day in terms of the broad church. I think the generation of the living are recognised, especially regionally, especially in the bush, that we aren't afforded the luxury of putting up barriers. So we all want to be committed to our to doctrinal purity and all of those things, our convictions. But it's really important that we work together to on the places we can and in the spaces we can. So, yeah, we work with right across the spectrum, Pentecostal denominations, and I just came from a meeting with multiple Pentecostal leaders from across the nation who are looking at how they work together, but also mainline churches, which we work with across Australia as well. And so, yeah, it's a good day in terms of that for the country church. I think there are good days ahead of us now.
This thought that somehow the city is sending leaders, the thought of, the white knight running and riding in to save the day, as I mentioned there in the my opening comments about what these perceptions are, you're saying that's just not going to happen. And if you're in a country town and you have a country church, you need to take responsibility. Is that too harsh a way to think of it? Are you just trying to disabuse people of a false notion that there's somebody coming to help at some time soon, more than just an online presence, but the sort of perceptions that sometimes people have when they're not necessarily ready to take some responsibility for raising up their own leaders?
Yeah, I think it's great that the city does do the part that it does, and obviously parts of the mainline church have been reasonably good at that historically. But if you look, the challenge is, Neil, not that the city guys don't care. The challenge is that we're not producing enough pastors and leaders to simply keep open the city churches that we have. And that's across many denominations. So, and I realised I would sit as a young pastor, I sat in a lot of meetings where all the solutions were trying to get the city colleges, etc., to provide ministers to the bush and and regionally. And what I realised a few years into that was it just wasn't happening. And so we went, well, what if we raise them up from within? And of course, the country people are uniquely positioned to reach country people because there's just so much they understand already as it relates to the communities that they live in. So we don't need to raise gigantic apostolic leaders of mega churches. But we can raise good pastors, leaders, deacons, elders of local country churches that are equipped for the task of shepherding a local community.
You know, I hear from time to time a little bit of a criticism of new upcoming generations of Christian leaders. The thought that you're going to be handed some sort of leadership role with a six-figure, salary attached to it, those sorts of things. Clearly in a country town, and you mentioned some of those that you're visiting, very small, couple of thousand people. Smaller than that even. But the thought of being able to sustain some sort of full-time pastor, this thought of being a tent maker or, a bivocational pastor, is this something that you have to look at in the bush?
Yeah, absolutely, Neil. And they're my roots. It's not where I am today, but they are my roots. So I do understand this space as personally. But I think that is the model. There are a couple of really key things that are involved. One is the moving towards a bivocational model that's sustainable, and I think that actually there's an exciting, dynamic element to that. It keeps you grounded. It gives you real perspective in terms of the people that you're living amongst. One of the challenges for someone like me is I pretty well exclusively train pastors and move amongst leaders. And so, but the bivocational pastor, which I historically was, is very aware of what's going on at a grassroots level for everyday people. And so there is a way to do that really well. We actually have bivocational pastors, many across Australia that we've helped plant, but certainly in our own church. And the key is to give them the resources and the tools and the support from maybe a larger regional church, we would call it a resource church, that offsets the workload so that they can focus on the key work of pastoring people and, making sure that they're a shepherd to the local flock.
Helping you make sense of life, culture and current events from a biblical perspective. 2020 on Vision.
And 1-800-316-316, our talkback line open, and you can send us a text on 0447 488 316. And our special guest, Darren Bonnel, and Church Planting Director for Australian Christian Churches. He's leading a multi-site church with 8 locations throughout regional New South Wales. Our talkback line is open, 1-800-316-316. We'll take some calls shortly, but Darren, let me ask you about this Jethro project. This is your church planting initiative, and I just wonder whether you've got any reflection here on Jethro, the father-in-law of Moses, and Moses working his fingers to the bone and risking burnout and such things. The Jethro project, give us some thought here about what that all means.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. The Jethro project is named, as you would expect, because of the Jethro and Moses encounter/scenario. And of course, what I love about Jethro is that it's not about him. Jethro is there for a period of time to help Moses reposition as a leader healthily and reposition the nation in a sustainable way for the expansive, God-appointed future that God's calling to them to, which is the Promised Land, obviously. And so I love that Jethro comes in and he can speak truth in love to Moses and develop him as a leader, but then he can speak to what needs to happen. And the risk for pastors is that Moses pre-Jethro is doing all the work. He is the minister, the shepherd, he's functioning as a judge. And the tension is you can feel like the minister doesn't care if they change up their role. And what Jethro highlights is that Moses doesn't care less when he becomes a person raising leaders and pastoring. Moses actually, by making that painful change to his leadership and pastoral mix, by making that painful change, actually enables more care to go on and more people to be helped and for them to move towards the promise of God. The other side of it is, of course, it creates sustainability for Moses as a leader. And so I love that. That's essentially the work that we're involved in around planting, revitalisation and leaders.
And with that sort of model, everyone wins. Hey, we're taking calls on 1800 316 316. Let's hear from Mick in Nambucca Heads in New South Wales. Hey, Mick, welcome.
Thank you. There's a temptation for the current pastors to hold it all in, and because they can't trust anyone else, and that's a big mistake because because the status that some leaders have, and they tend to own it and not share it. But I want to ask you, your guest, is there a temptation for pastors to ordain female ministers and pastors out in the country areas? Now, they can certainly, women can be leaders in all sorts of different ways, but there are scriptural boundaries, and I don't know, I'm not going to discuss the pros and cons of that, but is there a temptation to then to sort of make your wife a pastor as well, sort of thing, and all that, how it goes into the,
Mick, got the gist of where you're going with that, and different denominations have a different view of women in ministry. Have you got a thought or two there, Darren?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think I would first, just by saying that, I understand the biblical view, and obviously there's a range of thought, and that's not for me to debate, but where it is the case that there is a theological conviction of men only in ministry, I think that you have to work within the constraints of that. And so that said, I think if it's a covering issue, if it's an oversight issue, the Apostle Paul was the oversight of churches without ministers that had deacons and elders, and so I just think, again, looking at the modelling of how we do this, for me, the bottom line is, are we reaching people for Jesus, and are disciples being made, and are we doing that with biblical integrity? And so we have to find ways to reach as many people as we can. And so it does take innovation that's set against our convictions biblically.
Mick in Nambucca Heads, and sometimes this issue is raised, and I always like to describe the way we think about those scriptures that talk about women in the Bible, New Testament, and the debate comes around whether those things are descriptive for a first century cultural environment, or whether they are prescriptive. In other words, do they hold weight throughout the whole future of the church? And sometimes that's where the debate is. But Mick, appreciate your insights very much. Our talkback line is open on 1800 316 316. You can join in our conversation. Come back to this Jethro model, because coaching, training, church planting, multi-site expansion. This is an exciting thing when you start to think about the possibilities of when you can work together with people in country churches. And you've obviously been seeing the fruit of that, Darren.
Yes, Neil. I think the key for us is everything at the Jethro project has to be principle-driven and purpose-built. So we're not trying to be prescriptive in how you do this. But obviously there are some biblical patterns that make up a local church, and so but everything we're doing is principle-driven and purpose-built rather than prescriptive, for the reason that you've got to be able to contextualize the church and the leadership gift or the ministry gift on the leaders, the size of the town, all of those things. So we're working with lots of people in all kinds of scenarios, because there remains local churches, local communities that still need local churches all over Australia, and so we have to continue to fight that good fight, as it were, and this is an incredible day to get it done. I think there are ways to support local pastors and local churches in ways that we haven't been able to before, that can create sustainability in communities that otherwise would be just closing the doors of churches.
Sometimes we think about denominational differences, and they may be actually smaller than some people make them out to be, because what I can hear in you, Darren, is that you can train leaders on principles of leadership that's going to supercharge their church effectiveness in their community. And that even includes appreciating denominational distinctives, that some people do think things a little bit differently, and they'll have a few different ways that they run their church, but that doesn't mean they can't be a part of a possibility of seeing their church grow and expand, and to see leaders raised up in there. So it does away with one of those barriers that some people sometimes think of.
It does, Neil. In fact, I come from what I would call conservative Pentecostal roots. Personally, I am in my world jokingly called a Bapticostal, and but my wife comes from a family of Sydney Anglicans, like many of whom are more college trained, SMBC, and so that's quite a diverse group of people. And so what we do at the Jethro project is go, our leadership pipelines, we're not trying to develop you doctrinally. That's for denominations to do. Our role is to develop sustainability and to develop leaders who have capacity, if you like, and churches that can be sustainable, whether they're 25 people or whether they grow to be, multiple hundreds of people or whatever that number might be in a local community. And what we're trying to do is connect you to the pipelines for leaders, the tools you need for discipleship, disciple making and making disciples, and even things like finance, where we have access to resources maybe that not everybody does, to help church planters within their framework, their denomination and context, plant strong. So, yeah.
Hey, Darren, great to talk to you about these things. Just before the news, I mentioned the idea that in some country churches, some will be thinking, well, the horse bolted years ago. We've been just surviving, maybe it's a remnant of people gathering together. Maybe there's a church building, but not much more, and there's some need for revitalisation. Is that something you come across, churches that just, hey, it's too late for us?
Yeah, hi Neil. Good to be back with you. And Neil, we encounter that all the time. And look, personally, when you think about the churches I personally lead, that is primarily the story as well. In terms of we get caught into situations where the church has no pastor, down to 10 or 15 people, and what we've been able to see God do, and he makes you a certain way, I suppose, and is see flourishing churches. I mean, think of a small town. I'll give you an example, like somewhere like Gunnedah. When we started there, we went into a revitalisation situation where there were 10 people, 10 really faithful people in a church. Well, 6 years on, that church owns a building, almost debt-free. There's about 140, 150 people attend there on a Sunday, and about 1/3 to a half of that church have come to faith in that church. You can go then to a smaller community like Bendemeer, which is a community of about 250 people, and the average attendance, the Uniting Church partnered with us, leased us a building for almost $0. We went in, renovated that building. It looks like a wedding venue, white picket fence. We've had to put a portable kids building in as well. And that church in a town of 250 people has about 45 people on a regular Sunday. And again, people coming to faith and being baptised in the local river in the community of Bendemeer.
Wow, so in Bendemeer, a quarter of the town turns out for church on Sunday. And this is one of the things, isn't it? I imagine that in country communities where there are churches, and some of them being disused, and I know that, that rubs people up the wrong way, and they feel pretty bad about the fact that there might be a church building, it's empty and it's not being used. The thought of a revitalisation just makes your spirit lift. And so this is something that can happen. So for those people who are thinking that, all is lost and it's too late for us, how easy is it to connect? You do a Zoom call, you can talk to people, you can hear their concerns, you can listen to their heartbeat. Is that something you can do?
That's right. We work with, like you mentioned, we work with churches all over the country, across the denominations. The easiest way to just explore, is there a way forward for you, is to go to the Jethro Project website, and you'll see that there's a spot that just says book a call, and that's completely free. We're here our bottom line is a local church. That's what we're here to do, to steward the space that God has trusted us with, not leverage it. And so we're here to help you do what you do. That's our job, and that's our call. So go to the Jethro Project website, hit book a call, and I'll see you on Zoom.
Now, for people thinking, where does the money work with all of this? I mean, you've got a local church in a local community. You've got someone from the city thinking about, helping to revitalise. What sort of funding issues do you find that people ask you about? Do they think you're about to sort of swoop in and take away what little they had, and all of a sudden it's gone and it's been lost to a strange sort of another denomination or something like that? What sort of suspicions do you come across in communities?
Yes, of course. The thing that people worry about are buildings, their money, and their name. And so one of the things that, I lead a multi-site church, but within that, we have what we call MOIs, Neil, which is a Memorandum of Independence. Our job is to protect your name. We come, when we do it personally, come onto your board, but keep your board. And then after a predetermined period of time, we come off your board for you to self-determine your future once you're healthy. That said, that's how we do it with the Chapel Collective. But from the Jethro Project perspective, we're not on your board. We're not taking your property. You're not handing over your money. We're literally coming in to support you digitally and etc., to support you, to help you create your own plans. And in the church plant situation, that's completely free. In revitalisation, etc., we have very low amounts of money that we ask for as it relates to services. But the other thing is we can actually connect you to finance for some revitalisations and replants that don't require you to pay anything forward or anything back. We're here to serve the local church.
Stay and pause on that for a few moments. You have some access to some external funding that crosses denominations, that when there's a revitalisation of a local church in a country town, no doubt there's some conditions and everything that, maybe you've got to jump through a hoop or two, but there is some funding that actually can help make that happen, Darren.
That's correct, Neil. And look, there is process, because we don't want to plant cowboys, if you like. But if a church is healthy and it's got good people at the core and a simple plan, very low. People always ask us, what are the strings attached? It's not about that. There are people in Australia who want to help the country church thrive. They want communities to have churches at the core of them. They want people to have places they can come to faith in, and communities that they can thrive in. So, again, simple conversations.
You mentioned, if there's some good people at the core, and my mind immediately races to the fact that in some country churches, there's such a family heritage in country towns. You know, my granddad or my great-great-great-grandfather, he was a part of the formation of this church, and we don't want to go and lose all of that heritage. So just trying to maintain where the history, the heritage of that church goes, so it's not going to be just lost with someone else coming in and helping a hand to revitalise. How does that work for you?
Yeah, so think of us as if you think of it as the house, we're just forming part of the ecosystem around you to help you. We're not taking over. We're working with the people on the ground that are there from a Jethro project perspective. The chapel collective is different. We will come in and lead the church, but from the Jethro project perspective, we're literally there to help you do what God has called you to on the ground. So two different things. In terms of protecting heritage, we 100% agree with protecting the history. What I would say is, though, you can't build a church that's historically postured. You have to think about what church is going to serve the community moving forward. And so that might require some change whilst you hold on to the history that is your foundation.
And the way that the sort of oversight that your group can bring when people feel like they're on their own, or, hey, we've tried to get a revitalisation going before, it just hasn't happened the way we thought. It fizzled. You know, it gets a bit of a start and then it stops. The thought of having someone external being the mentor, this would be the value of mentoring, of being able to keep the excitement flowing while people are going through even tough times, getting things, you know, up on their feet again. That's, I guess, the value of what you bring from that external pursuit.
That's correct, Neil. So, and that's absolutely what we do from the Jethro Project. And then, because we have a network of people that we work with all over Australia. So if you're in a regional or community or a rural, remote community, we also will have people in every state that we can connect you to relationally at the same time. But yeah, from the Jethro Project perspective, we're there to be an external mentor, coach, resource to you on the ground where you are.
Let's talk about how a new leader might look, because if you're talking about raising up leaders in country towns and within a local church context, because if you have no leader, I mean, there's no one to lead a funeral. When someone dies, you know, you do want someone to be there and knows what they're doing to be able to conduct a funeral. Otherwise, it's, I don't know, it's a very ad hoc situation. But there's a lot of things, doing a wedding, those sorts of, if you don't have a leader in a country town, there's a huge, big loss. And so some of those sorts of losses come with having that leader present. Now, if you're in a very, very isolated place, it might be even still rare that you're going to get someone face-to-face come out and visit. But how often can you coordinate someone to come out and visit face-to-face? A little bit along the lines of what you do with your chapel collective.
Yeah, so as long as you're connected to a resource church, what we call a resource church, like a hub church that has capacity, so we would send teams every week to every location, either worship teams or a speaker. They're the two big ones, a preacher, teacher, or someone to lead the worship. So we have people moving around locations every single week out of bigger locations or bigger churches. And so that's, again, it needs a heart that is kingdom-minded, that is outward. And of course, and it needs the heart of the resource church to be prepared to carry that, both in terms of the people and the finance. The other thing you do is you can centralize a whole bunch of the things that really wear out a local church, like who's putting together your weekly Bible studies, having a preaching team, using video content, having online groups for things like, for example, if Alpha, where you can do it digitally from a hub because you don't have a leader to facilitate it for you weekly. There's so many ways to do this now.
Darren, are you working to mobilise opportunities for retired pastors? Now, I often hear of retired pastors in the city who are, they're doing their own circuit. In some sense, they're going off to relieve pastors who are on leave for whatever reason. Is there any way that, if you're a retired pastor and you're thinking, I'm not a spent force yet, is there a way you can mobilise those retired leaders?
Neil, if you've got any listeners in that category who are former credentialed pastors of any tradition, I would love to have that conversation with them. And here's why. I've done some work with the guys out of Holy Trinity Brompton, the Alpha guys in the UK, Bishop Rick Thorpe, who's coming to Australia but has been in the UK for the longest time. And one of the things that they've done really well is to re-engage and empower former ministers and lay ministers with some simple training to be what we used to call the boundary rider, ministers who will go into a congregation for a weekend or for a few weeks. So absolutely, we'd love to have those conversations. And so if there is anyone out there, obviously we've got to do checks and all those things, but we're here to help people minister as God has called them, but as communities need.
Our talkback line open 1800 316 316. You can send us a text on 0447 488 316. And let me just ask you about, because, Vision Radio, we're into a lot of country towns. There's 700 cities and towns and communities, and we're in the big cities and we're in the bush. So many people have supported us over the years because this expansion has been with interest in country towns. You were actually on our Visionathon last week, and I was on while you were there, and you reminded me, yes, hey, we've got a segment coming up. The fact that there is some Christian media that works in those country towns, and a lot of those where you're working with your church planting projects, how valuable is it to have Christian radio in those towns and being there as a 24/7 undergirding support for people who are looking to maintain their Christian faith?
Neil, so many country people. If I can go back to your raising money last week, so many people in regional areas use country radio. And remember, when you're travelling, me too, when you're travelling big distances, sometimes the only thing you're getting is the radio, right? Even with all of our modern technology and platforms. So Vision Radio plays a vital part in regional and rural Australia, and I can tell you that from first-hand experience. And the other thing is I mentioned to you is to remember that when I came back to faith, I went to church as a kid, walked away in my teens. The first thing I did was on a Sunday night, I would scroll through the radio and I would find Reverend or Dr. Gordon Moyes, and I would listen to him on a Sunday night. I wasn't ready to go to church and I didn't want to tell my friends, but I was so hungry for the Word of God and curious about Jesus that I started to listen to Reverend Moyes, and here we are. That is, radio has me here and played a vital part in my salvation.
And, when it comes to media, that's one thing, and we always appreciate the value of that, and there's lots of great support that comes to us for being able to have a focus on the bush. But there's no substitute for that face-to-face fellowship, walking hand in hand with other believers, even knocking some of the rough edges off from time to time, but being there when you're going through a tough time and having someone personally there face-to-face who can sit down and just hang out with you. Those local churches in country communities are absolutely necessities. Let me just ask you quickly, the thought that sometimes church buildings are falling into disrepair. People think, we're waiting for the white knight from the city to come. They'll probably bring some help there. Other organisations, Mobile Mission Maintenance does a fabulous job too, helping churches maintain repair. There's a big network that if you're trying to get your church revitalised, back on its feet, there's an awful lot of people who are ready to help, but sometimes you just don't know where to look. Do you find that too?
Absolutely. And what you just said, there's so many great Christian people and great organisations out there that really just do want to serve. And so in terms of, you just named one. And I think there's bigger country churches that have resource and they just need a compelling reason to help, so reach out and look. Not everyone's there to take over, and that's really important to understand. In our own sphere, we say the winner has to be the local church, not the central organisation. The winner has to be, we say over and over again, we're here to serve the local church. And so there are lots of people with that heart and mind. So look, reach out to your connections. And if anyone's trying to take you over, absolutely ask big questions. But you'll find there's a lot of people that are just there to help.
And without the healthy local church, it's the whole community that suffers because, a lot of people in country towns will remember times when there was a fabulous youth program in a local church and they went through it, or they know some kids who went through it and that just transformed their lives. And the idea of support groups when you're going through some real challenges, or food banks when there's a really interesting and crisis, even disaster area. You have to have some leadership, though, that's determined to be a part of the community there, and that's what you're trying to do is to get effective leaders into country communities. For people wanting to connect with you. What's the easiest thing? You mentioned you can do a Zoom meeting. You can go onto the website. You can just get a Zoom meeting set up, and someone can just talk to you and just maybe pour out their heart as to what's happening in their community. What are the next steps from there to get your local church revitalised?
Yeah. So if we were to Zoom, you can also email us at darren@jethroproject.com.au. And that's if you don't even want to Zoom, you're not ready for that. And so Darren@jethroproject.com.au. But beyond the initial call, we would normally do a Zoom call, and we call it a ministry call, Neil. And so we're trying to understand you, the heart of your church, where your church is at, what's got to happen, how you're going to get there. We're just asking lots of questions in those first one and follow-up calls. After that, at the end of a second call, we will often go, hey, let's talk about a way forward. And we will either give you things you can take away and do, or you might want to engage with us and work together for a period of time, 3 months, 6 months, a year, and around your leadership pipeline or revitalisation or whatever it is. And so, usually 1 or 2 calls. And after that, you'll be able to go away and do some things without our help, or we're there to partner with you to go on that journey for the next period of time.
A text from a listener who says, love the program. Please note that Scripture Union have several vacancies for school chaplains. The Anglican Church also has several vacancies that combine well with school chaplaincy, making up a full-time job. When you're talking about that bivocational pastoral leadership, no doubt there are country towns that don't even have a school chaplain in their local school. They may be able to get a school chaplain, and that school chaplain may well be part of the leadership for local church. There's another dimension there, isn't there, Darren?
Neil, that's actually how I started. It's the very first round from Prime Minister Howard of national chaplains. I went into a school as a chaplain. I can't remember now. I think 3 days a week. Thank you, Mr. Howard. And I pastored the church bivocationally. That's exactly what I did. And it's the perfect blend. And the reason is it embeds you at the heart of the community. And, we are now, 20 years removed from that. And when I'm in shopping centres in Tamworth, where I was the chaplain, I run into the families, many of them Indigenous actually, run into the families and the children and our parents and got their kids, and we stop and we talk. It's an incredible way to partner your church revitalisation or church plant with a ministry that is really effective and extremely valued by the local community.
Well, my encouragement to listeners in country towns where churches are in disrepair, and things need a real revitalisation. Don't let this moment go by without jotting down how you can connect with Darren Bonnel. Certainly jethroproject.com.au or thechapelcollective.com.au. And he is also the church planting director for Australian Christian Churches in New South Wales. No doubt you can connect through there as well. You could even send Darren a personal email, darren@jethroproject.com.au. My encouragement would be don't let that moment pass by where you could just set up a Zoom call, find out what could happen for revitalisation of your church. And we're not talking just regional New South Wales here. Very, very quickly, because we've run out of time, you're interested to talk to people all over Australia, aren't you, Darren?
Yep. Neil, we work with some of the largest high-profile churches in Australia, large city churches all over the country. So, yes, while my passion personally lies in the bush, the Jethro Project, we would actually work with more city churches and country churches just by sheer number of churches there are in cities. So yes, we're working with everybody across the spectrum, the denominations, small local churches, large mega churches, everyone in between.
Okay, jethroproject.com.au or thechapelcollective.com.au. Darren, thanks so much for sharing your heart with listeners today on 2020.
Neil, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate your time. Here to help.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.